Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Before the Doors Open series. This has been a full-part conversation presented by the PGCC Galleries. So what we've been doing pretty much is preparing for the opening of Marlboro Hall, which has been under construction for, I believe, more than 7 years. Am I correct?
Wow.
So it is finally opening in a couple of months, but what we are excited about is the fact that there is a brand new gallery space. And so in preparation for that, this series is sort of changing the culture of the school and acclimating to the idea of having a professional gallery space. I am your host. I am Dr. Eden Reff Presco. I serve as the gallery director for PGCC. I'm also associate professor of art history. Today, we are interviewing Claudia Aziza Gibson Hunter. She is a contemporary artist and educator whose work explores the expressive and symbolic power of material. Her practice moves across sculpture, assemblage, and mixed media using found and constructed elements to investigate identity, memory, and the layered histories carried within those objects. At the core of her work is a deep sensitivity to how materials speak, how they hold traces of lived experience, cultural meaning, and transformation. Through her process, she creates pieces that invite viewers to slow down, look closely, and to consider the unseen narratives embedded in the physical world around us. In addition to her studio practice, she is the co-founder of Black Artists of DC, as well as a dedicated educator, shaping and mentoring emerging artists while contributing to broader conversations about art, culture, and creative inquiry. Today, we have the opportunity to hear directly from her about her journey, her process, and the ways she understands material as a source of power in her work. When you hear the phrase, Aziza, material power, what does it mean to you in your practice today?
Well, first, I want to thank you so much for having me, Dr. Reff Presco.
Absolutely.
I see art beyond it being an object.
Mm-hmm.
I think these objects that we make have power that flows from the artist to the object. So these things become, and actually they absorb power from things that are around them, from sounds, from attitudes that people have. All of these invisible things become part of the visible in that work. So I see the work as holding, it can actually hold memory, I think. Years ago, I saw a science fiction movie where people would put their hands on something and then they could remember from it. Well, I think of art as something like that. Yeah. So literally, I think that the work has power, that it's more than just an object, that it is a power object.
When you talk about the power that are in the objects, right, as it relates to artistic works, can you think of a piece that resonates with you historically that you engaged with, maybe by another artist that sort of developed this idea?
Yes, I can think of. I just recently went to see the exhibit that was at the National Gallery of Art of work by Aborigine people. And there was one room that you walked into, and it had these, they were sculptural pieces, and they were gathered together, all on a platform. And I literally walked into the room, and I stood in front of it, and I just started to weep because they were that, I could feel that from it. And so that's an example.
I can absolutely relate to that. Every single time I see a Radcliffe Bailey piece, I start sobbing. I literally start crying. And I'm like, I don't know why, but it's something very deep. And I don't know if any of you have had that experience. Have you had that experience? Okay. It's just, it's overwhelming. It's not just the process, but it's also the story sort of, and not, you don't have to be in the room with the artist while they're creating it, but somehow it just pours into you, and it's an overwhelming feeling. So what are you currently exploring or wrestling with in your work right now?
Well, I've been working on this issue of flight for over 5 years now. And sometimes what I can do is to take a historical situation and try to see it in terms of energy. So let's say the assassination of Martin Luther King. When you think of that, can you think of not the person, let's let the person kind of fade away, but can you think about the energy that comes from that and what that might look like? That's what I like to do. And I was looking at Reconstruction. It was a period of time right after the Civil War where our people finally had a foot off of their neck. And what did we do? We built communities, hospitals, over 2,000 schools. We built universities. We had 6 medical schools during that time. We had businesses and funeral homes and orphanages. And this was happening all through the South. How many of you learned about Reconstruction, that period? Okay. I have gone into auditoriums of people, and no one was ever taught about that period. It was a very powerful, powerful time for our people. And so I was trying to think about what would that energy look like? All of these people just, like, we're going to do it. No, I couldn't read. No, I wasn't allowed to read. Yes, they would amputate my arm if I tried to read. Yes, my eyes could be gouged out because I want to read, but it's off my neck. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get it. I don't care if I'm 50 years old. I don't care if I'm 90 years old. I'm going to learn it. I'm going to build. I'm going to make. I'm going to do all the things that I was told that I couldn't. And so I was trying to figure out, what would this energy look like? And now, just hold that for a second. At the same time, I'm looking at starlings, and I'm looking at these things called murmurations. Have you ever seen these patterns of birds where they fly in these fantastic formations? They make these formations where there's hundreds and thousands of them. I was looking at those, and I thought, look how all of them are they're just in rhythm with each other. I said, to me, this was like Reconstruction. This was like, you see what I'm doing? I'm making a metaphor, a visual metaphor between an energy of a people and the energy of these birds and how they move. So then I went to a friend of mine's funeral, and the minister talked about her spirit, and he talked about murmurations. Well, I learned something during her service. I learned that those murmurations had no leader. So that movement that they had was an internal in sync that they had. I also learned that if a bird came away from that murmuration, it could not fly at the same velocity. It could not fly at the same height. I also learned that when they're in murmuration, predators are like, oh, I'm not going to try to mess with that. There's thousands of them, it's one of me, right? I found for me, that was a perfect metaphor for what we need to do, right? When we're together, we are more powerful. How can we move together without designating a leader? How can we look inside of ourselves and get in sync with what needs to happen? I felt as if that was the kind of thing that we were watching during Reconstruction, but I was also thinking that this gives us some vision for what we have to do now, because we're facing something very serious. So this is what I like to do. I like to try to look for these metaphors and messages within something that looks very abstract, but there's a whole story embedded in it. And the story is to inspire and to give energy and power to those that are looking at it.
So you understood the assignment. The idea comes to you. The research then takes place. So how did you move from this is the idea and the story that I'm trying to convey to the use of the material that you chose to best convey this message?
I'm afraid most of this is very much instinctual. I can't say that I plan ahead. I can just say that as an artist, I think, it's like having, you're always feeling what is around. Everything is, you're looking, but you're also feeling. And everything that you look at, you're trying to, you think in terms of, well, can I use that? Or it's in your back of your mind always. And I have a love for paper, so I do use a lot of paper in my work.
And this is paper you're making.
Yes. I make paper. I also use commercial paper, though. I look for textures. I'm looking for scents. I'm looking for color, tone, form, all of these different things at the same time. So I can't say that I sit down and I consciously make a decision about what I'm going to use. In fact, one of the things that I do is I'll go into an art store or also places like Lowe's or Home Depot, and I just walk the aisles sometimes. I just walk the aisles because I know that I will see something that I'll say, that's it. That's something that I need for that work. And I can also go out to the park or, outside and look and see and find things that I can say, yes, this is what I need.
So there were several images that were showing. I don't know if it just stopped sharing, but I don't know if you all saw the images that were showing, but there is a transition.
I tried to put them in chronological order for you.
Yes. And so here we are at flight school. Even though you talk about intuition, that's intuition today in your career, right? And so at some point, we can see an evolution of process, an evolution of voice. And so I want students to understand that part of your legacy is important to how you got here. And so when you think about your relationship to the process, what you're making today, what was that journey like in evolving your voice?
It's been a long journey. It's been a long journey, and there have been lots of hills and valleys and tearful times and happy times and times when I wasn't very sure about anything. And then times when I felt absolutely crystal clear about. But this came over time, over time.
I know, and I see a couple of my students here, and I know we talk about, like we may look at Romare Bearden's earlier work, like Factory Worker, and then look at Romare Bearden's later work, and you see a lot more figurative work. In your earlier work, there's more figurative work.
Yes.
And so what does it mean to do abstract work? Because isn't it funny that most people have a harder time responding or relating to or sitting with abstract work, but that's where a lot of artists seem to land. My favorite artists land in the abstract realm, even though we were doing all this figurative work.
Yes. Well, I think in the beginning of my career, it was very important to me to be able to draw the figure, to try to get the different nuances of behavior and attitudes and that type of thing. And there is something so magnificent about the Black body, with all of the it carries so much history, so much pain, so much of our travel from our continent to here is all in this body. And I think what happens is that, well, for me, there got to be a point where the body was bringing to the piece so much that it didn't give space for new kinds of thinking. And I found that sometimes the body actually, the ideas were outstripping what I could do with the body. So that is when I started abstracting. And the abstraction, it developed over time. At first, it was very much, the figure was still in there. And you see the figure kind of fade a bit until it moves into the abstract.
Okay. So what does your studio practice require of you mentally and physically, perhaps?
Well, when I get up in the morning, I spend 2 hours just going through emails and reading over things like, I like hyperallergic. It's a very nicely written art journal that's daily, and it gives you something to think about. Now, I like thinking about it's like a mental workout, art workout. And so I read over that. Now, I'm finding at this point in my life that because I am right now the head of a 501c3, I have a lot of responsibilities as far as connecting with other artists, making sure whatever projects that we're working on, everything's in its place, whatever administrative kind of things that we have to do. I spend time with that. And we have a couple publications that right now, a lot of that falls on me. And so I'm working on those kinds of things. And I'm in a very strange place right now because my studio, I had a studio in a garage at the back of my house that was adapted so that I could do my artwork in there. But I also had another studio, which was a larger studio because for the last couple of years, I was working large, 15 feet by 14 feet, large pieces up and down a ladder, and I needed a big space for it. And during the summer, it was called a Stable Arts, and there were about 22 artists in this facility. And the people that owned it decided that they were going to sell it. And so I was out of that space. So everything now is from that space, and my space that I have is all crammed into one space. And so it has been challenging. It has been challenging to make that that switch over to a smaller space. But when I'm in there, I keep a sketchbook in my studio. I walk around with one, and I keep one in there. And this is something that I think is really very, very well. I would have my students to journal because, particularly for our people, the documentation of what is going on with the artist usually is not there. We miss a lot of that. So by journaling, what you're thinking about, what you might want to do, it gives a record. You're leaving a record of what it is that you're doing. And it is very important. And we should understand how important it is when people start to try to erase it, which is what we're experiencing now. So if you begin your practice like that, you have a record of your thoughts, your feelings, and what you were working on, who you were interfacing with. This all becomes material that you can use and other people can use to understand the time that you're in. So, so that goes on, and then I start to get to work, basically.
You mentioned some challenges regarding, different facets of your work, right? Mm-hmm. What keeps you dedicated to the process, even though things get difficult?
What keeps you dedicated? I am compelled to do art. It's not like something that I say, oh, this is wonderful to do, because sometimes early on in my career, when you got an idea and your hands and your knowledge of how to use materials it hasn't developed to the ideas that you have, it is frustrating as hell. So it can be some very tormenting times as you develop. But in my case, this is the thing that keeps me sane, literally. It helps me to function in this world where, and particularly I think in this country, where I am constantly bombarded by the contradictions of what it says it is and what it is. And I refuse to make believe that it is what it says it is. I know what this is, and I see what it does to my people. And knowing that, I feel compelled to make this work where I can talk about some of the things and express some of the things that I'm thinking, not only the hypocrisy that I see and the pain that that hypocrisy makes for people, but also the vision for another world and another way that things can be.
So what did you have to unlearn to arrive at your current practice?
Ooh, that's a good one, because I went to, well, all my life I've been going to different art programs. So I came up, I had an art program that was right around the corner, basically, from where I lived. And my weekends, that's where I was. But it was when I went to an art school for undergraduate work that I really started to understand just how powerful art was. And I came to understand that in the way that the contributions of Black artists was totally null and void in that space. And I think that the approach to art was very much connected to the head, but very little connection to the heart. So there were, I think, the teaching of the ability to be technically proficient was there, but the heart, it was just missing. It was missing. And that was one of the things that I felt I had to unlearn. I think also understanding the work as an object that you make, as opposed to the transference of energy, this thing transferring energy from me to it, from it to me, from it to those that looked at it. It's a different kind of understanding that I really didn't come into. I would say one thing about going to Howard University was having the opportunity to think about the work with one foot in African concepts and African American sensibilities. Yes, to have that was very, being able to reconnect with the heart was very fulfilling. Yeah. So I think that what I had to unlearn was seeing it in terms of technique always, and technical proficiency, and being able to understand that this stuff is it's the stuff that universes are made of. It's a, it's a very different, it's a very different sensibility.
I'm getting choked up. I don't know if that's the universe or what. I want to open it up for questions right at this very moment before we continue. There's a microphone right over here.
So the first question that immediately came to mind, because you had mentioned earlier, you make paper. Can you really kind of expand on that? How do you make paper?
Oh, okay. Well, I had an opportunity. There's a place called Pyramid Atlantic. It's in Hyattsville, Maryland, and there you can learn to make paper, you can learn to make books, and you can do printmaking. They teach it. They have master teachers there, and I had applied for a fellowship there and received it. So in this fellowship, I decided that paper making was the thing that I wanted to do. And what is really cool about paper is that you can make it from fabric. So I made it from, I used linen and cotton. But what was really interesting is that I could bring things and I could put it into it. So it's a big machine, and it beats the fabric up until it becomes like a pulp. And then it's that pulp is floated in water, and there's a screen that you put down into the water. Well, you beat the.
I think I've seen a
Okay,
video
yeah,
where you
it's
put like something on top of it.
exactly,
Okay, I've seen it.
exactly. So these filaments or like fibers are floating around in the water, and then you take the screen and you dip it down in there, and when you pull it up, some of those threads that are now beaten down, they stay on the surface of the screen, and that becomes the paper. And you have to it's a process of eliminating the water from the fibers, and you have your paper. So I had the opportunity to make a paper there, and then I found some ways that you can do it at home with a blender. Yeah. So that's what I was doing.
That's really cool. Thank you for your answer.
Yes, and please, and know that there are internships available at Pyramid Atlantic, and there are courses that are offered there for young people to learn these things. So, yeah.
Okay. Another question?
You said that you attended a lot of art programs. One of the things that I personally experience is that to make it like kind of short, to get better at my art, I think in my head that I need to do a lot of different art courses, art classes, art programs. And then eventually it comes to the point where I feel like I'm learning the same thing in every class or program that I take. And I guess what my question is, what would you say is the most important thing that you took away from your art programs? And like, how did you sift through what you needed to know versus what didn't really help as much?
What's the most important? That's a very good question. What's the most important thing the most important thing that I learned is that this is not something that you do by yourself. I want each of you to look at the person that's sitting next to you. Just look at each other, to your left and to your right. This may be the person that shows you a new technique, that gets you your first exhibition, that you share your first studio with. That's who these folks are. And they are the ones that will help to inspire you and push you. So all of this is not internal. It's not selfishly yours. We are all part of something much larger, and we're here to help each other.
Just the last comment, not a question, but just a comment. I do agree with that a lot. When I started going to, instead of taking courses like online and I did them in person, felt like a lot more motivation to do art just because I could see what other people were making in real time and talk to them. And it is really cool seeing someone do something and then you kind of just take it and try it on your own. So I do agree with that. It does help a lot. And I feel like perspective is really important. I feel like with art, you get trapped in your own interests, your own little bubble, which is a good thing, but you could always use more perspective. And I feel like it helps a lot.
Absolutely.
You know, one of the things I would say specifically about that, you know, how do you know what to keep and what? I think you don't know what not to keep until you just have to be a sponge, right? You have to be a sponge. A lot of students I know are into anime and animation, right?
Mhm.
And there's this idea that maybe this art that is old or these artists who were doing things 100 years ago may have less significance, right? Because they weren't doing anime.
Yeah.
But learning those artists and learning those experiences and how they were able to navigate material much different from us, budgetary wise, right? Because who could afford marble, who had wood, those types of things, right? So it's important to basically know your history, right? Take as many different types of studio classes. Because honestly, when I was at Howard University, I was studying electronic studio. That's animation, and that's, graphic design, doing graphic work, digital work. So now my first love is ceramics and sculpture.
I had the same experience where right now I'm doing painting and I love painting. It's really fun.
Hmm.
Uh, so I get what you're saying. Trying different avenues. I used to be that type of way where I would be really close-minded on like art history or like other mediums. I was always just paper, pencil, doodling in class.
Hmm.
But I've moved on to like trying to do graphic design, animation, painting, and you get so much generally that makes you better as an artist just by trying different avenues.
Hmm.
There's just something that clicks in your brain when you try different things, and I think that's really helpful.
And the other piece that she mentioned about the community part, the community that I had in undergrad and in graduate school, they're still my community. As a matter of fact, I'll just share. When I was working on my dissertation, I was interviewing artists. I interviewed Aziza. From that interview, now she was a professor at Howard when I was there, but I didn't take her class. Now here we are 20 years later, and she is one of the biggest influences on my dissertation and how it developed.
Yeah, it's like you never know what's really around you.
And so people are important, building community, finding your tribe who can pour into you, right? And you can pour into them. That's important. So.
Absolutely. Because so many times in art school, it can become very competitive.
Mm-hmm.
My undergraduate school was extremely competitive. And what it was killing was all that we could have gotten from each other because we were so busy just trying to stay in our little space so that we could come up with something that was better than what somebody else had. When you think in terms of doing your work and taking in that energy from the people that are around you and bringing it to your work, it's a very different kind of way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
What do you hope people experience when they encounter your work?
Well, I really don't. I try to leave that alone and just think I'm offering this, and some people will gravitate toward it, and some people won't. And that's okay. It's okay. And some people will like it now, and 10 years from now, they say, I don't like it. And the others will come forward, will appreciate it more 10 years later. So, we're all in this dance of becoming. And so the work is there to interface with people wherever they are. Yeah, so I don't try to, I have all kinds of little messages in my work, like people that know how to read Adinkra symbols, well, they'll say, oh, she got a lot to say. So there's things that are in there, whoever can partake, wonderful. Yeah.
So then that leads to my next question, and this may be a little bit more complicated. So with that in mind, a lot of us are trying to make livings, right? And I always struggle with the part about not making to sell. Make it because I'm committed to this process, and this is the way I communicate, and this is my area. But how do you bridge or work between those two concepts of also trying to make a living as an artist, but being committed to your voice and, what you're doing?
I'm going to say some things here that I usually don't say in public, but I'm going to say them.
We're still public, by the way.
When you're in art school, you are never taught about what I call the art industrial complex.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yes. And that is the industry, I think I saw a $600 billion industry. Yeah. That we are on the periphery of. We never are given any understanding about how that thing works, why it works, even what the history of it is. The industry was never made for artists to be able to make a living from it. That took me a long time to come to grips with that. It was created for the collector. Artists, let's look at some of the situations that artists are put in this, and I have to say in America, yeah. You buy your artwork, you buy your supplies, usually at retail price. What business is there that you buy the materials for your business, for this thing that you're doing, at a retail price? No, you buy it wholesale. Why? So that you can resell it and make a profit, right? That's one. The second thing, if you donate the work, you can write off the cost of the materials. If a collector donates the work, they can write off the entire retail price of that work. Hold that one. Let's suppose you get to the point where your work goes to auction. The collector that brings that work to auction sells it, let's say they bought it for $25,000. They bring it to auction, they sell it at $50,000. Wonderful, right? Does the artist that made that piece of work get any royalties from that? No. So in the structure of this art industrial complex, it takes care of the collector much more than it takes care of the artist. And you know what? It's going to stay that way until artists organize themselves to fight for the things that we need so that we can earn a living from what we do. So we cannot always be at the mercy of this industry. We have to fight for things. And I think that one of the things that we need are things like trade unions. And I think we need something like, I mean, we're inventive and creative people. We can come up with ways to organize ourselves to be able to help to create an industry that is viable so that you don't have to work 10 jobs in order to do your work. What kind of sense is that? What do you I ask a physician, oh, I guess you have to go wait on tables to be able to to do your job. What is that? We go to school for 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. We work hard, we attain skills, and then we're told, oh yeah, well, wait on tables, while you're doing that. No. There's things that artists have to do. Yeah.
So, well then, for those individuals who may not be in the arts and don't know the level of commitment and work that it takes to go into this building your capacity to produce, what do we say to them that will say, well, that's a doctor, you're an artist? I'm sure some of our students have parents who have maybe stated to them, study something different. Am I correct? Okay.
I guess, again, I just think that we have to make something, we have to make a different kind of we have to create something new. And it's a lot to ask, it's a lot to ask. But we've got to try to figure out a different way to do things. During the Black Arts Movement, one of the things that we've thought about these things. During the Black Arts Movement, many artists, Black artists, got together and they said, well, we're going to hang our work on fences. We're going to hang our work anywhere where our folks are, that our folks can see them. And one of the things that was very popular during that point, too, was to make prints. And I was initially a printmaker. And I was a printmaker because I thought it was the most democratic of all the different areas of art, in that I could create a plate. I could designate, okay, from this plate, I'm going to make 20 images, all the same. And so the price of it could be lower so that it could be sold to many people. And I think that there's a lot there. I think that there is a lot there. But I do feel that we just haven't concentrated on understanding that we really need to come up with some different ideas about the art, about the sale of art. What happens what if there were things like barter systems where, and I had a physician who we traded art for procedures that I had to have done. All right? So, but see, we got to think differently about what we have. And we've got to value what we have and respect what we have, and then try to find ways that we can get a fair price so that we can live our lives and do what we have to do. So a lot of this is going to be having to think outside of the box that has been given us. And I think that when we do, marvelous things will happen.
You mentioned earlier about the collectors, and we were just talking about Titus Kaphar earlier this week, and he sort of wrestles with this idea of the work and that he's been creating, the themes. He made it for a specific audience, his people. And most of his work is going into white homes, not necessarily museums, right? So what do you say about that piece?
I think, too, it's the very same thing. It's how we're thinking about this. We've got to... There's a way, we have to find different ways of thinking about what it is that we produce. Yes, that bugs the hell out of me too. I want to see the work in places where it's accessible to my community. So I have done a lot with the Art Bank in Washington, D.C., where the city purchases the work and then they place it in the offices throughout the city. So, when you go to the Office of Child Welfare or something like, you'll see the work. And so, and I find that to be very fulfilling. And then they conserve the work, they take care of it, and it is put in what is it called? But it's documented.
Registered?
Yeah, registered, right, exactly. It's registered and archived. And so, so I find that to be a really, really, that to be really good. But then one of the things that we can do, what happens if we begin to fight for something like WPA? Because when Obama came into office, I actually wrote a little white paper with some other artists to say, we need something like WPA. And during WPA, during the Roosevelt administration, he came up with something called the WPA, Works
Progress
Project.
Administration.
Yes, administration. And artists were paid a salary for doing their art. Why not? You see, it's like a different way of thinking. And during that time, there were printmakers who their job was to get up every day, go to the press, and there were people that did murals. There were people that did paintings. They had different departments, and you got paid for doing the work. And America got a whole cachet of work that mirrored its culture and the times and what was going on and what people were feeling. Why not? Why shouldn't we expect? When I was in Cuba, I was amazed at the everyday person's connection to art, respect for art, that because it was in their education. And so we can develop people who respect the work and appreciate the work, which develops a market for the work. You see what I'm saying? So it's a whole, we just gotta think a little bigger and put our heads together and our hands together and and push for another, and you'll get a different kind of society. Because that work is affecting people. They're allowed to feel. I mean, part of what we have going on right now is that we have people that are imbeciles when it comes to actually feeling what their decisions, the implications of the things that they do. You know, but what art does is it makes that more malleable. Yeah.
So you mentioned Flight School is your latest work. What are you moving toward right now?
Well, I'm still looking at the flight school stuff because I'm thinking I just love that metaphor that those birds provide for us as a people, giving us some idea of what we can do, you know, just so I'm still making those, but I'm finding that I'm getting very interested. I have two ways that I could go. I'm looking at flight in terms of myth. And we have some wonderful myths about Black people, Africans, flying. And they come out of, Zora Neale Hurston did an anthropological study where she would go to sections of the South, and she was interviewing our people about different beliefs that they had. And this story of the flying African comes up several times. And for the young people, if you had the book, The People Could Fly, were any of you introduced to that as children? Okay, it's a beautiful, beautiful book. And it talks about you have to get it. The People Could Fly. It's a wonderful book, but it's built off of that. So I just like that magical kind of thing, and so that's one thing that I have been looking at. And I found that there is a festival. It happens in May, and it happens in a place called Igbo Landing. And that was a place where a ship, a slave ship, was landed there, and the people got off of the ship, and they walked into the water, because they were like, I can see what this is going to be. Now, some people say that they drowned, and some people say that they flew. And people come all the way from Nigeria every year, and there's a celebration that happens there. So I'm interested in that. But then the other part of this is I have this interest in physics. So, and there's an interest in, on one level, everything around us is vibrating. It's just vibrating at different
Frequencies.
Yeah, frequencies, right. So I'm not quite sure what that would look like yet, but this whole thing of that vibration and things vibrating at different frequencies, which gives materials different properties, is interesting to me. So I'm thinking about both of those things. But I do have work that I have to finish for. I have commissions that I have to do, so, I have those that I have to do too. But they'll probably be still in the area of flight school.
Okay. So is there anything that you feel is unresolved about your career?
Yeah, I would say. I think I wish that some of the things that I talked to you about, the industry, I wish that I knew how to change that myself, or to bring about that change myself. And I think that having Black Artists of DC, what it allows me to do is to bring these issues up to young people and old artists alike, to ponder some of that and to think about, to expand their brains. And I just wish I could just mentally grasp a different way. But all I can do is continue to try. But it's frustrating because I just wish I could see it crystal clear so that I could say, this is what we need to do, but it's not like that. It's something that I think collectively we have to come to, and we have to come to it. This will be for all artists. All artists, there's a responsibility for ourselves as artists and for artists to come that we need to take to make sure that when they do this study that they go through, and it's hard getting all of those assignments done. It's difficult having to memorize all of that stuff for color theory. You work, and you should be able, there should be a way for you to live from that, from what you have worked so hard to do. So that, I think for me, that is something that is unresolved, and I would like to just try to inspire people to think about these things.
Okay. And so what does growth look like for you at this stage?
That's interesting that you asked that, because when you're a young artist, you're a young artist. When you're a middle-aged artist, you're a middle-aged artist. And I am now in the winter of my life. I find that many of my colleagues, a lot of times we're not willing to face that. And what does that mean, right? Mm-hmm. So I have lots of art still. I have, the art is like having children. And you have to leave those, you want to leave your children in a good place, right? You only have so much time. So how do you make arrangements for your art? That's the mature thing to do. Yes, I am in this period of my life. I do not live forever. I have this work that I create is not only work that comes from me, but it comes from the time that I am in. It informs people about what was going on around me. It was inspired by other people. Their thoughts, their energy is in that work. How do I prepare for me not being there? Because the art lives longer than I do. So there are things like that we have to grow up and understand, yes, we must make a will. Yes, we must think about trust to protect the people that even we leave it to. It needs to be in a trust. Yes, I can give it to places. I can loan it to them, and and when I pass, my children can say, well, I want that one and that one, but you can keep the rest of them. Right? These are things that we do not handle in the most mature fashion. And I am working to say, I'm going to be a grown-up, and I'm going to deal with these things. So I think that is, and it's just very important. And all of the young people, make sure that you sign your work. I have seen too many situations where an artist has passed and left work that is not signed. The family cannot sell it for the price that they should be able to because it is not properly signed. So sign your work, journal about your work, document. A lot of us are not documenting our work, so our family does not have a record of what it is that is even there. I mean, we leave sometimes our families in a lurch. So it's a lot to think about. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to turn the mic over to the audience for a few more questions.
Okay, so my question is, you were talking about how artists are not able to sell their paintings, their art. Is there any art do you have that you were not able to sell or would rather keep it because you enjoyed it too much?
Yes.
Can you elaborate, like is there like a certain piece exactly?
I have people, you know, you have some pieces that are just dear to you. And yes, I have those, and I hold those for my family. I think in terms of my family. And I'm trying to teach my children as they mature and as their living is stabilized, I make sure that they have work, right? So that they are given work and to share with their children. So, yeah, that happens, and that's okay.
And another question I do have is, you said you at first started as a figurative artist, and then you transitioned into abstract. Do you think, in that transition, do you think now you're like allowed to elaborate more with your work or express yourself more?
I think that the abstraction helps me. It works very well for conceptual things like ideas, right? It's very conducive, I think, for to use it to examine ideas. But you know, sometimes I get really, I miss the figure.
Okay.
Yeah, I miss the figure sometimes. And what I was doing, even while I was doing the abstract work, I'd take you know how they have the life classes where you can go in and draw the figure for. I used to do that before COVID. COVID just blew me away. I'm still getting together from that. But every Wednesday I would go and I would just draw for 3 hours, you know, life figure. Just for the observation, because it's wonderful for observation. I mean, you're focusing, and you got to get that hand right and those nails, you know, everything. So it's you know, and I think many artists come in and out of the figurative and the abstract. So you know, we can do those things.
That's all I have for today. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
My first question for you would be, so as an artist, I myself, I put a lot of effort into my work, and a lot of that effort is driven by like the need to experiment and have fun with my art. And I was wondering what emotion or emotions usually drive your creative process.
Curiosity. Curiosity is a big one. And yeah, I think curiosity and then just inspiration. Sometimes, you know, sometimes you're just walking through the park and, you know, you listen to the birds and the grass is beautiful and there's some beautiful flowers there, and you're just like, boy, life is good. And we have the ability to put that into something that we make. And somebody can walk past it, look at it, and say, life is good. And that's a really incredible thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Second question is, a lot of the times I myself, whenever I'm trying to transition to a new like art form or art medium, I find myself not satisfied with how my art would come out because I'm technically a beginner. And I know it is because I am a beginner and because I do not have that skill set developed yet. So I was wondering, do you have any advice with trying to handle that emotion of I need to be perfect at every art form because I'm already good with one specific one?
Well, I've sat down and cried over things like that. But give yourself grace. Give yourself grace. Understand that you are becoming, right? You are becoming. And what you are experiencing is like the rough part. It's just not all easy. Yeah.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome. Mm-hmm.
My question is, so for me personally, I realized that over my 20 years of life, which is relatively short, that the things I wanted to do with my art has changed over time. And that's making me wonder if what I want to do now is going to like even matter in the future, if that makes sense. Like, cause I want to do like animation and film, but when I was younger, I wanted to focus just making drawings and painting. So I wanted to know, like, when it came to like when you were experiencing that, did you ever feel like you had to stick to one thing, or did you add it on to what you wanted to do for the next project?
I'm going to go back to what there's a document called the Zulu Personal Declaration, and one of the things that the Zulu talk about, this is 1865 is when it was written down, so God only knows how old it is. But one of the things that the Zulu understood very well, and many of our ancestors understood very well, is that we are boundless. The boundaries are artificial things that have been given to us. So you may be one thing, interested in one thing today, and something totally different tomorrow, and then the day after that you may take those two things and put them together and make something absolutely new. So I'm saying that if it's something that you think that you want to move on from something that you were doing, you just take that thing that you were doing and you just put it in your pocket. Because you never know when you might want to pull it out again, right? So just think of yourself as being infinite. Infinite, okay? All right.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I want to say that I think I kind of underestimate how important like networking is in art, because when I first started here, that's the biggest mistake I said I didn't do, was networking with different people who were also in art and things like that. So that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, it's very, very important. You all are going to be each other's support as you move through this thing, and you are going to inspire each other, and you are going to give each other seeds for ideas that you can't even imagine right now. So, yeah, keep each other close. Very important.
And for those of you who are my students, I know that you're studying for your exams, right? Because exams are next week. And those study sessions with your partners, that's where that networking could begin. So
Absolutely.
just want to point that out. Okay, so we are at the end of our program, and I want to thank you so much for blessing me today and for blessing me always.
Well,
right?
you've been a blessing to me. It's, when young people come to us old artists, it is always a joy, especially when their hearts are open and their minds are open. It's a wonderful thing. And I want to thank Vanessa for coming. She's from my class at Howard back in the day. And we have Marshall that's here. He's from the Howard University's alumni, fine art alumni. So we're trying to help all of us to understand how important we are to each other at after school, you know. We can do so much for each other. So thank you both for coming out. Yeah. And thank you so much.
And so with this series, we do have one more session that we will try to work on, which pretty much talks about Marlboro Hall and shows updated images of the facilities. I know that they're doing tours right now, and people are getting to see it. You have to sign up for the tours, but okay. And so we have a couple of exhibitions that are coming up, so I'll just state what they are. There's Terrence Nicholson, who will open October 8th, and that is in the gallery in this building. And then for the first Marlboro Hall inaugural exhibition, that is Chess Not Checkers. I want you to sit with that. And that's it's gonna represent artists from all over. So we have Native American, we have artists from Puerto Rico, an artist who is Afro-Colombian, African American artists. So it's very diverse, but tackling what it means, chess not checkers, and consider the thoughts around what that could possibly be. So that opens August 29th. Okay? So thank you all for being here. This has been Before the Doors Open series, almost final. And deuces.
Okay.